We start here tonight. There has been mixed reaction, as it is every year, to President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address last night. Many analysts have said Ramaphosa's speech was basically more of the same, with some highlighting there was nothing really new at SONA 2022. The speech did, however, touch on a number of economic issues, but it's been Ramaphosa's drive to help the private sector thrive that has been widely welcomed in that sector. Coovaida is the Chief Executive Officer of Business Unity South Africa, and he joins us now for more. Mr. Coovaida, thank you very much for joining us. Before this speech, Mr. Coovaida, Busa had said it hoped that the speech would convey the gloomy mood engulfing South Africa's economic trajectory. In your opinion, was President Ramaphosa able to do that yesterday and maybe inspire some people in the public and the private sector?
Well, I think from a sentiment point of view, I think he was quite emphatic on the role of the private sector, that it's the private sector that will create jobs, and that it's the role of government to create an environment for the private sector to do that and to be profitable. He talked about how red tape is strangling the economy and strangling the ability of the private sector to actually establish businesses and grow businesses. He talked about people's lives being intricately linked to the economy, and that if we don't have economic growth, we can't actually deal with the social issues that we have. So all of that, I think, is positive. But again, and he talked about a 100-day plan to bring about some sort of social compact. We would prefer using those 100 days to actually identify 3 or 4 critical issues and how business and government can work together to actually implement and make things happen. So I think from that point of view, it was good that he was emphatic. He was much more clearer that we need growth, we need investment, and that private sector needs to drive that with the appropriate environment. But we now need to see how we actually work together to make that a reality.
Mr. Coovaida, we've known that now that there's going to be these 100 days. What, in your view, should be in the in-tray, the top agenda for the presidency when it comes to tackling the red tape, either for small business or big business, just like yourselves?
Well, there's a couple of things. The one is that government, under the leadership of the president, needs to be unequivocal and needs to have a single message to investors that we will create an environment for investment. We want your investment, and please come and invest in our country. There should be no buts behind that sentence, because I think the president and government need to understand that we are competing with other countries for that investment, and countries just to the north of us on the continent who are actually attracting that investment. So that needs to be the first thing. Then we need to have a clear message from government on the sort of economy we need to build, and what sort of policies need to be put into place, how we deal with the red tape issue, how we remove the barriers to creating businesses. And all of that needs to be decided by government, and there needs to be a clear message from government. And there needs to be a single message. We can't have the president saying something and then one of his ministers saying something different. The president has got to put his cabinet behind him, and he's got to be absolutely clear with them that they need to follow his vision. Then I think that we need to see what we can implement fairly quickly. I'm glad that he said that the spectrum auction will take place pretty soon. That's been stuck in court. He talked a lot about energy and the impact of raising the embedded energy ceiling to 100 watts, but we need NERSA to come to the party to not put barriers in the way of businesses actually generating that energy under the space that's been given by the president. And I think that and that's what we need to do in the 100 days. And if we do all of that, then we can, in 100 days' time, say, government has shown leadership, they've taken decisions, we know where we've got to go to, then let's pull together a social compact so that as society as a whole, we pull our weight and we put our shoulders together to implement what government has actually directed. We can't have a social compact to decide what to implement. We can't have a social compact to decide on what sort of economy we want. Those are decisions that need to be taken by government after consulting with business, labor, and communities. But they need to take those decisions.
Let's talk about implementation. Whenever you look at all the commissions, the task teams, or all of the plans that government has, it's always been the issue of implementation. What have we been doing wrong as a country that we can't seem to implement anything that we have agreed upon on paper?
Well, I think, the President has on numerous occasions talked about the lack of capacity in government, weaknesses in government. But the way to deal with that is to utilize capacity that's sitting outside of government. As business, we have said time and time again that we want to put our shoulders to the wheel with government. We have indicated to government that we are prepared to provide capacity. The President must take that capacity. We should be working together to ensure that we implement. We shouldn't be continuing to say government doesn't have the ability to implement. There are resources and capacity sitting outside of government that are begging to be utilized. And the President must unequivocally say that if there are resources and capacity sitting in the business environment, and businesses are prepared to actually work with us to bring those resources and capacity to bear, we are going to use them so that we can implement, so that we can move more quickly, so that we can jack up the capacity, for instance, of the National Prosecuting Authority. We can jack up the capacity of some of the SOEs, provided they are governed properly and so on. So there needs to be a far more productive, constructive relationship between government and the private sector. It needs to be a robust relationship, but it needs to be far more constructive and a closer relationship.
Mr. Coovaida, Sipho Nkosi is a well-respected businessman in South Africa, currently the chairman of SASOL, and he is quite respected in many quarters, and he's been given this huge task by the President to actually remove the red tape. Do you have confidence in the presidency when it comes to that? And I know you have engaged with Mr. Nkosi at some point, as they are members of the big business organizations. But in your view, what support will he need to make sure that he actually opens the doors that are closed to small businesses and bigger businesses in South Africa?
Look, Sipho is an excellent person. He's proven himself, he is capable, and so for the President to appoint him to do this piece of work, we are fully supportive of that. And I have already indicated to Sipho that once he understands what the terms of reference are and so on, he must please shout if he needs help. But I think we do need to make a point here that Sipho is not in government. Sipho will have a task team, he'll do what he needs to do, he'll make recommendations on what needs to be done to significantly reduce red tape and make it easier for businesses to do business. But at the end of the day, government departments need to put into place the policies and need to implement whatever Sipho and his task team recommend. And that's the issue. So, ideally, and no disrespect to Sipho I'm sure will do a great job. But ideally, what the President should have done is pulled, let's say, the Minister of Trade and Industry and the Minister of Small Business Development into a room, tell them this is what we need to do to reduce red tape significantly. I want you to do this in the next 2 months and I want to report and if they don't do it, to hold them accountable. We keep on sort of putting together task teams and those sorts of stuff. When we know what the issues are, we know which departments should be dealing with it. They should be dealing with it. So that's what ideally I would have liked to see happen. But anyway, the President has decided to put together a task team in the presidency under SIPO. I have total confidence in SIPO, and I'm sure he'll do a tremendous piece of work. But at the end of the day, somebody in government has got to implement that, and I hope that the President, once the recommendations from the task group are out, the President is absolutely clear with the relevant departments that he wants those implemented immediately, otherwise he will hold them accountable.
Mr. Coovaida, before I let you go, this is one issue that the President did not touch on, and an issue that I was expecting, the issue of mandatory vaccinations. Here, the President did put another task team together to look at the efficacy of actually introducing mandatory vaccinations. As business, this is something that is very important to you, and it's something that is quite topical and emotive. As it stands right now, what is your view when it comes to this issue? And would you have liked to hear from the President at this stage, as we start 2022, about where we are going when it comes to the mandating vaccines in the country?
Well, we are clear, and we've been consistent on that we need to have some form of mandatory vaccination. So one, to increase the demand for vaccines, because all the science shows us that the more people we vaccinate, the greater our chances of controlling this pandemic. Now Omicron might have been a fairly benign variant of the pandemic, but we don't know whether the fourth wave that's expected in winter is going to be like Omicron or like Delta. So we've got to, and the best tool to manage the virus is vaccination. The science is unequivocal about that. And that's why we need to vaccinate people. That's why we need some sort of mandatory vaccination. So we are quite clear that we need to look at mandatory vaccination. Some businesses have already applied that under the OHS directives. We are looking at various mechanisms to try and get legal clarity on that. It would have been great if the President announced that there would be mandatory vaccination for all public servants, for instance. I think that would have given significant impetus to this. But be that as it may, as business, we are driving this very hard. Businesses are driving this very hard, and we are looking at ways and means to actually get more legal clarity on this.
Mr. Coovaida, the CEO at Business Unity South Africa, thank you very much for your time, sir. Him telling us that he would have liked to see a more immediate action, maybe a different configuration of some of these task teams, but certainly more work that needs to be done by the cabinet to steer this economy in the right direction.